Cheek versus the United States. Court. This case was decided by the Supreme Court of the United States in 1991. Issue. The primary issue the court considered was whether a good faith misunderstanding of a law, which is objectively unreasonable, can be used as a defense to criminal liability, and the court held yes, it can. Facts. The facts of this case were as follows. The defendant, Cheek, was a pilot for American Airlines and filed his taxes every year through 1979. At the end of 1979, Cheek became heavily involved in a group that believed that the federal tax system was unconstitutional, and influenced by the information he learned in this group, he began claiming 60 allowances on his W-2s. He believed that claiming so many allowances made him exempt from federal income tax, so beginning in 1980, he did not file his taxes at all for many years. He also became involved in several civil lawsuits challenging the constitutionality of federal income tax, though his complaints were repeatedly rejected by the courts for more or less being frivolous. Cheek was eventually charged with tax evasion under a statute that provided that any person who willfully attempts to evade or defeat any tax imposed by this title shall be guilty of a felony. At trial, Cheek represented himself and presented two distinct arguments. One, his deeply held belief that federal tax laws were categorically invalid, and two, that even if the laws were valid, he did not believe that his wages constituted income based on the statutory language. He presented as evidence supporting this second argument, a letter from an attorney stating that the 16th Amendment did not authorize a tax on wages as income. Though the content of the letter was obviously ridiculous, the letter did bolster Cheek's argument that he genuinely believed that he was acting within the parameters of the law. The trial judge instructed the jury that if we were to find Cheek honestly and reasonably believed he was not required to pay income taxes, then he should be acquitted, but that if it were to find that Cheek's belief was not reasonable, then his honestly held belief could not negate his willfulness in violating the statute. Based on this instruction, the jury convicted Cheek. Cheek appealed his conviction to the Supreme Court. Again, the issue being considered here was whether an honestly held but objectively unreasonable misunderstanding of the law can be used as a defense to criminal liability. Analysis. The Supreme Court of the United States ultimately held that so long as a misunderstanding of the law is subjectively honest, it can be used as a defense, regardless of whether it is objectively reasonable or not. The court began its analysis by explaining that, generally speaking, mistakes of law are not valid excuses to criminal liability. However, one exception to this rule applies when a specific mental state is required by a statute, and that mental state is negated by the actor's mistake of law. Here, the tax law at issue, like all tax laws, was very complex. So much so, in fact, that the court openly doubted that the average citizen could understand it. The law also required the specific mens rea of willfulness, and here, Cheek's misunderstanding of the law negated his ability to violate the statute willfully. Because of this, the Supreme Court reversed Cheek's conviction. Rule to remember. The rule to remember is that, generally speaking, mistake of law is not a defense to criminal liability. However, one exception applies when a statute requires that the actor have a specific mental state, and that mental state is negated by the actor's mistake of law.